Okay, good afternoon everybody. Thank you for coming to the Measuring Value workshop. On your seats you'll find a little goodie, which is basically a blank set of cards which you can scribble on. So if it gets boring you can do doodling. If it gets really exciting you can take notes. And if you get to the end and you've got some observations, some thoughts, some comments, some ideas or some questions that we haven't covered, then please write them down there and leave them here, and we'll sort of interact with them or use them as best we can. So, I'm Tim Hayward. I'm the Group Finance Director and the Head of Sustainability of Interserve, which is what makes me sort of almost uniquely placed to discuss measuring social value. People often look at me and think, well, isn't the FD the guy who knows the cost of everything and the value of nothing? And isn't the head of sustainability the guy who knows about values but hasn't got a clue how to get to them? And in my dual role, I try to actually cross that divide and bridge that gap and help the organisation to understand that, yes, you need rigour, yes, you need measurement, and yes, you need some soul and some belief and some heart to understand that not everything that's valuable actually can have a monetary amount put to it. And that's a difficult gig to sell into an organisation or into a world where quantification tends to be absolute and tends to be in monetary terms. And I think we are trying to lead the way in being an organisation, as Adrian said this morning, that values more than money. And values as opposed to puts a price ticket on more than money. I'm sure we'll talk about this in more detail over the course of this session as to, does value actually have to have a pound attached to it, or can, you know, I value my daughter but I won't give you a price for her. And that's the sort of dichotomy we're facing, because my other part of my world is to investors and to procurement people who want to know, okay, well, this is going to cost 27p and now you're telling me it's got some societal value. Well, great, prove it. I want to demonstrate it. I want to measure that against the 27p and see which I value more. And therefore, this is the sort of the essence of the debate, in my view, of social value measurement. Not just social value measurement, because if you had a look at our progress update in your goodie bag, you'll know we're also doing the same sort of journey with knowledge capital and with natural capital. And it is a journey, and we haven't got to the end yet. And through the tool that is also in your bag on social value measurement, the mapping tool, that's another way that we're trying to tackle these things. And I'm very much coming to the opinion that actually there is no one silver bullet. It's a broad range of things, and that the first thing that we need in order to measure social value is an awareness and a cultural belief in our organisation that this is of value. And therefore, a lot of what we've been talking about as we've been getting our sustainability plan underway is actually getting our people to understand the role a company, in our case, plays in its wider community, and why that has some business benefits and why it has some societal benefits. And then from that point on, once you've sort of suspended the disbelief and opened the minds, then you can start trying to do some of the measurement. Now, we've been at this for more than 2 years, and Ali has just reminded me that she was in with us at the early stages when she worked for a different organisation, helping us to wrestle with the early stages of measurement. She's now moved on to bigger and better things, and she's got all the answers, which is great because she's going to be our first speaker. So that's Ali, who is from NEF Consulting, part of the New Economics Foundation. Then we move on to Mark Graham from PwC, who have not only got a measurement tool, they were so inspired by what I've been doing that they named it after me. So, Total Impact Measurement and Management. Tim, how lovely. But I have been working with PwC as well on this sort of stuff. And then we've got Adam at the far end, who I think is probably well known to a lot of people in this world, and will speak from personal and long experience about social return on investment from FRC. And I think that organisation he'll talk about more in in detail as we get to it. So we've got a blend of big business, consulting, third sector, social enterprise world, all of whom are sort of wrestling with how to value, and in fact, indeed, should we value social value. So without further ado, I'll take us through the talks. I think probably best if we can limit the questions after each of the sub-presentations to just points of clarification. The guys have promised that it won't be death by PowerPoint, that you'll have no more than 10 minutes of each of them. And then really I want us to get into a debate and keep us all alive in this post-lunch session in this very warm room. So, first off, Ali.
Thank you. Just so I'm not in front of the actual projection. Yes, well, thank you, Tim. I'm from NEF Consulting, which is the consulting arm of the New Economics Foundation. The New Economics Foundation was set up about 27 years ago with a wave of interest in reforming the economic system, which is all about metrics and our kind of ability to be totally governed by them. And the New Economics Foundation was interested in changing the economic system to become more socially just, to become more environmentally sustainable, and to put a priority on people's well-being. And as I'm sure many of you can imagine, that's the challenge that we're working still very hard on today. Over its years, the New Economics Foundation has spawned various interesting initiatives such as social accounting and social auditing, ethical trading initiative, and one of them was us, NEF Consulting, so we're a social enterprise ourselves, and we do mainly helping organisations with impact measurement and bringing in triple bottom line into, considerations into their decision making. We're quite well known for social return of investment analyses because we run monthly courses, which I lead on, and we also help, we've been pioneers in the development of the social return on investment methodology, which now sits with the social return on investment network and is governed by them. We're also quite hot on well-being measurement, and some of my colleagues particularly have done a lot of work in commissioning for outcomes. So that's sort of where we're coming from. And I've been asked in particular to talk today as sort of best practice, practical tips. So, I mean, just to get a sense of the room, who here knows that their organisation or their project is measuring its social value? Shall I wait? Any more for any more? Not sure? Who is really happy with the measurement and confident with the systems that they've got in place? Okay, no one. Good. Well, hopefully some of these tips will be of use to you. So first of all, we were saying at the beginning that everybody's got a different definition of social value. Well, for us at NEF, it's basically anything that changes people's lives. I mean, social value suggests that it's probably a positive change that you're creating, but we take account of social, environmental, and economic considerations when we're looking at that. So in terms of best practice, you could press the clicker forward. That would be good. I've got 5 tips. Should that work now? Yeah, great. First of all, prove and improve. And I think this is something you're going to hear from all of our speakers for this particular session. It's that measurement is not the be-all and end-all of what you should look to do. Measurement should be part of an action learning cycle that you're going through with your organisation, where you're measuring because you want to make what you do better. So you're not just proving the value you create, but you're taking that insight, that measurement, those findings that you've come up with and putting them back into the design of your project and trying to enhance the value that you're creating. So it's kind of like a fundamental principle. Don't just measure to show off and shiny reports. Make sure you're really invested in this as a way of conducting your organisation. Second of all, understand what changes. Now, you would be amazed, but the language of outcomes is still relatively new for the vast majority of professionals. A lot of what most people do with measurement is efficiency measures. And you'll see this particularly even with public sector contracts. They want to see the difference that you're creating between your inputs and your outputs. Now, outputs are tangible products of what you do. They're the numbers of people. So for my courses, the number of people that attend my course, they're the number of hours that I taught for and the number of qualifications that we give out. But they don't actually tell you anything about the change that you've created. The change is the knowledge that those people have left with, or the increase in knowledge, hopefully some fun as well, we hope for the best. So focusing on what changes rather than what's easy to count, easy to measure. Now, materiality. Now, this is a principle that was introduced particularly through social return on investment to help organisations and projects scope what they measure. And it comes from accounting. It's a very useful concept which is being used a lot by businesses as well for strategy work now, and it's to focus on measuring the things that are significant, and that means in terms of the magnitude of the change that you're creating and relevant to what you're doing. And that will really help you get a grasp of what, not to do these endless shopping lists of measurement, which you then don't really know what you want to do with, but to make sure you're using something useful. Consider impact and do not overclaim. So this is a kind of good practice whenever you're doing measurement. If you're feeling bold and you want to go for a big figure, I would beg you to think again, because you will look silly if you have a lovely shiny report with some massive number, if it quickly gets shot down by your peers or competitors. So think about impact in terms of what's really your share of the change that you're creating and what would have happened anyway, even if you hadn't existed. And finally, involve stakeholders. Involve stakeholders the whole way through. And by that we mean talk to the people that you're creating change for and understand it from their perspectives. There's a lot of tools that are readily available for you to pick up and use for your social measurement, but go and make sure that they are ring a chord with the people that you're actually trying to help. So I'm just going to give you 3 examples of some recent work we've been doing, which I think might bring to life some of these principles. And then I'll conclude with a couple of thoughts on where the sector's going. So first of all, we were approached recently by the Canal and Rivers Trust, which is the body that governs all of the canal waterways around the UK, or most of them. And they said to us, we want to understand what the social, cultural, sort of ecotherapy benefits are of this junction just north of Birmingham called Fradley Junction. And so they wanted a financial figure on this. They wanted us to monetize it so that they could communicate it to policymakers. And I'm using this example because the first thing that we did was we went and talked to the stakeholders, the people using the canal themselves, and we came up with these sort of key outcome areas, the things that people really value about the canal, including well-being values such as peace and relaxation, learning about heritage, feeling connection with the history of the area, and just getting out and enjoying some exercise. So we then conducted a survey in which we did a number of primary valuation, non-market valuation techniques, and we got 3 very different sets of figures depending on the approach we did to valuation. I just want to draw your attention to the 2 sets of bars on the far right, because I'm just going to explain the difference between those 2 that came up. Between them, they suggest that there's a range of somewhere between 1.1 and 3.6 million pounds worth of social value existing for people who use the Fradley Junction regularly. That's the boaters, the walkers, the runners. And that's a really big range. And actually the set of bar charts on the far right is about half the value, roughly, than what's being suggested by the middle sets of bars. And that's because we did 2 different valuation techniques, primary valuation techniques. One of them, we just used what we call revealed preference, where we looked at how much people were spending and travelling to get to the canal itself. And that's the one that comes out somewhere just sort of over $1 million to $1.5 million. And then the second, the taller bar, we asked them what we call contingent valuation, which is where they can say just to themselves how much would they actually be willing to pay to protect this area. And that gave a much bigger figure. And what do you do when you've got 2 completely different sets of valuations? Well, that's the beauty of having done this proper stakeholder engagement at the start of the project, because we could justify and explain why this middle sets of bar charts were so much larger, because they were actually accounting for many of the things that weren't just about convenience. They were accounting for esoteric experiences that people have culturally through this junction. So it's really useful to have properly done your qualitative research alongside doing your quantitative research and to understand and communicate what your findings are in the words of your stakeholders. Okay, so yeah, consider impact. This is one of our biggest clients, it's the Crown Estate. It's Her Majesty's land. If you people know, she owns a hell of a lot of land around the country and estates. We were approached a couple of years ago to help them with doing a triple bottom line report, which has since then gone into their integrated reporting. And they got some really thorny issues, such as they own all of the seabeds around the UK. Now, what do you do with a seabed? Well, perhaps maybe you let it out and allow some wind turbines to be built on top of it. Fantastic social and environmental value being created there. But how much of that is really down to Her Majesty, and how much of that, I don't know, goes to the power company that set that up? Well, best practice that we've been working with on the Crown Estate is to use this concept of credit in their reporting as well, which is another type of attribution. So that they can say for each of the changes, negative and positive, that they're creating, how much is a fair amount of credit for them to take for that change. They also did a number of other kind of provisions to make sure they weren't overclaiming, such as confidence in their data. I'm sure if anyone's had any experience of trying to pull together a measurement report for your organisation, you know, you get all sorts of data from all sorts of people in different formats and different qualities. So they used a grading system for the confidence of their data, and they also used this concept of net contributions, so they could tally up both the positives and the negatives. And the final example is from a local authority, some work that some colleagues of mine did with Lambeth. So Lambeth approached NEF and asked them for help with recommissioning their children and young people's services. And it was part of the borough's cooperative borough strategy. And they said, okay, well, we really want to involve people who are affected by these services more, but how do we measure that? And the point about involving stakeholders is that you do it the whole way round. So what you're seeing here is an outcomes framework that was actually created by the young people themselves. So it was for very different types of services, but the young people actually did peer research, and they used our wellbeing dynamic framework to actually name different types of outcomes that were important to them. And what they found, quite interestingly, was it was completely different areas of wellbeing that were important to the young people than what the council had previously been privileging in terms of measurement. So they had been doing a lot of research around what we call external factors, so stability of your family environment, the local economy, schools, that kind of thing. But what mattered to the young people themselves was a lot more to do with how they functioned, so how they felt when they entered a room, whether they were nervous. So they actually helped create this outcomes framework. And they actually also contributed to some of the indicators by doing things like when I feel statements. So we sort of said, how could you know that you're autonomous? And they had to answer little questions saying, I would feel autonomous when I entered a room with lots of people I didn't know and I didn't feel nervous. That kind of thing. So yeah, I think this is a really lovely example for lots of reasons, but particularly because of that involving stakeholders. Okay, a few quick thoughts, which I think will come out more in the discussion as we go through about where I think the social measurement field is going at the moment. There are lots of tools, and particularly in the business sector, growth and audits going on. So ready-made things that you can pick up and take off the shelf and use yourself. Again, I think that message that we would say is always start with a really good understanding of your own change that you're creating, because it's only through really talking to your own stakeholders that you'll understand not just what the change is that you're creating, but the why and the how. And so the other thing to say is, and I think, again, I hope this will come up lots, is balance your choice of tools and your approach of measurements with the budget that you have available. There's no point doing huge, great social measurement projects if it's totally detracting from your ability to actually deliver and help people. Materiality, I think I've seen this kind of coming up in more and more domains of social measurement, and I think it's a really good trend, and it's better for scoping of projects. There's also, as Tim was suggesting, a growing interest in monetizing outcomes. And I think this is something that's kind of grown in maturity in the environmental field, and it's now coming with quite a lot of force in the business world, at least also in terms of monetizing social outcomes. Again, our advice would just be make sure that you're not putting a paint job on a bad measurement in the first place. So be sure that the field's mature enough for us to be properly doing this kind of measurement. I think social valuation is really quite a young field on the whole. And this question of, as Tim was suggesting, if you're commodifying social value, that really needs to continue. And I think that with the last government, with the localisation agenda and a lot of the removal of red tape for local authorities, things like integration of services and co-production agendas, has actually led to more people engaging with stakeholders in terms of commissioning and measurement, and I think that's another good trend that should be supported. Okay, I will stop for now.
Great. Thanks very much, Ali. I'd give you a round of applause. Any points of clarification before we move on? Okay. Right, so moving swiftly on over to the world of PwC and Mark.
I'm going to stand behind you.
I'm starting to get a bit nervous here.
Okay. The four of us actually had a conversation on Friday, so I'm going to put this in context. We agreed that in terms of the different things that we would say, I would actually provide a PwC stroke corporate perspective on the issue of social value and social measurement. I'm going to hand over, obviously, to Adam in terms of the perspective from social enterprise. I'm Mark Graham. I head up the social investment and enterprise team in PwC. And I guess the best way to describe PwC is that I work with, the vast majority of people I work with are TIM. They're all financial directors. They're all predominantly accountants, and if we do nothing else as an organisation, we count things. So about 2-3 years ago, I had to convince the board of PwC that looking at social value was important both for the organisation and the engagement with clients. So the next few slides, I'm going to take you through the story that we told to the board. So, first of all, does actually taking the concept of social value have any benefit from a business perspective? This was a relatively easy narrative to explain because essentially, like man, no business is an island. And actually, whether you like it or not, as an organisation, you will generate positive and negative social, economic and other effects. And in terms of looking at those effects, what we did is we split it in terms of obviously shareholders, employers, all the way through to wider society. And we suggested that the rationale for considering what those impacts might be at those different levels could generate some significant business benefits, not just to our customers, but also to PwC. And we've actually since measured our social impacts and other impacts. So what are those? Well, again, in terms of whether you call it reputation or transparency, it's the engagement with all of those groups and being clear that you understand what impacts you're having. Secondly, again, the kind of license to operate, it's an American terminology, but again, in terms of engaging, procuring, actually selling to others, important for us because PwC has responded to the Social Value Act. Anything that we procure or bid into the public sector, we take account of Social Value Act, and very much commissioners are looking to us to demonstrate how we will bring social value. Similarly, in terms of influencing policy, finally, in terms of, the other two are identifying new business opportunities and actually flipping it back to the impact on supply chain, the impact on distribution, and actually looking at maximizing benefits tends to lead to changes in operation. And also developing new partnerships and funding opportunities. So all of those elements, not saying all together in every single case, but those are the types of benefits to measuring social value from a business perspective. Because we are a firm of accountants, we also actually said, here are some of the implications going forward to us as an organisation if we are going to independently and objectively review what our customers are doing in the context of social value. And what we did is we contrasted a set of audited accounts and the legal requirements for an audited accounts with what we believe and we're beginning to see in terms of companies presenting their social value and impacts. So the reporting scope will go beyond the factory gate. It will look at the impact on your supply chain. And again, within PwC, we have actually gone through all our supply chain to look at the impacts of our suppliers. The dominant driver if you've ever had the misfortune to do an audit, is actually looking at the past and measuring what's happened in the past. What we're looking here is actually what's going to, strategically, what you intend to generate going forward. Time frames, very important. You would be looking at short, medium, longer term. You would have clarity over what you're trying to achieve and why, and how you're going to measure that, and what, in a terrible term, what good would look like. Similarly, in terms of detail, actually, it's about being concise and material. That point about materiality is very well made. And similarly, in terms of trust, being transparent. Now, being transparent actually means admitting that you have generated negative impacts as well as positive, and you are doing something about those negative impacts. Information integrated, and then finally, in terms of performance, and going back to what Tim said, it's not just about the pound, shilling, and pence. It is about intellectual, human, social capital. So, that, to the board of PwC, looked very interesting, because here is something that we are going to have to respond to from our clients. This is a horrible PowerPoint, but in the sense of, okay, you've put the challenge about how to measure. This is the segue to Tim. We've developed, it's publicly available, we have put it out publicly to promote the debate amongst business about how to measure impacts. And we have included social, environmental, economic, and tax, public exchequer changes. This is a real example of a particular investment case by an organisation that was looking at various alternatives and balancing the impacts and making a choice about the impacts across all of those perspectives. So that's, it is on the web, it's freely available, so you can obviously access it. I thought I'd end with the kind of segue into Adam, is we also were involved in the development of the report Community Count, and that was undertaken with various parties, including Waite and Social Enterprise UK, and we actually surveyed about 65, 70 commissioners and about 100, 130 housing organisations, and looking at the impact of the Social Value Act on their activities. And I think it's very kind of what came out of that was those that are successfully engaging, measuring, and taking the implications of the Act forward were doing four things. And it's kind of self-evident once I read them out. But the first thing they were doing was defining what their strategic objectives are. So when we talk about social value, what are you trying to achieve as an organisation? If you don't know what you're trying to achieve, it's quite difficult to measure your impact. Secondly, in terms of integration, this is a thing that it should be part of your DNA. It's not something that is done to you. It actually becomes a component part of your overall operation. So it becomes integrated and understood within the business. Thirdly, delivering with partners, actually it does throw into sharp relief that if you are taking account of social value, particularly from a commissioner perspective, you might want to introduce organisations that can help you maximise your social value. And similarly in terms of the partnership, again the point made about stakeholders, actually whether we talk about stakeholders, beneficiary groups, clients, however you define it, again it's that point of not doing it to them, it's actually engaging with them in generating or maximising your social value. And then the fourth element is, this is all fine and dandy, but ultimately, I mean, I guess we're going to come back to this in terms of the discussion, you are going to have to measure what you think you have done to achieve your strategic objective with your partners and stakeholders. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Any clarification questions? Jolly good. Okay, so that takes us on to Adam from FRC with the...
I'll stand on this.
Thank you. I can actually see you.
I do have a tendency to wander about though, so if I disappear for a moment, I will come straight back up. Yes, good afternoon everybody. I'm Adam Richards. I work at the Furniture Resource Centre Group, or FRC as it is in Liverpool. And the same as Neff, we've been going for 27 years, which I didn't realise we had that connection. We started very much, I say we, I wasn't there, we started very much as a traditional furniture-based charity. There was a need identified in the local community for people to access good quality, low-cost furniture. There was also a supply of furniture being left on the street, shall we say. Somebody had the bright idea of putting two and two together. We got the supply of furniture to those in need. And fundamentally, we've stayed true to that opening principle. And our social mission, as it says, is to run businesses that create profits. And I stop there immediately because we are not embarrassed to say we make profits. We make profits very much so to reinvest into the purpose of the business around that social value that we intend to create. But we create profits and opportunities to change the lives of people living in poverty and unemployment. So very much around the provision of furniture, but we've evolved over the 27 years. The purple lorry, or purple wagon, as it's known in Liverpool, Bulky Bobs. Bulky Bobs is a free domestic collection service of unwanted bulky furniture. You've got a fridge freezer, a cooker, a TV you want to get rid of. You ring Liverpool City Council and we will come and collect it for free. We work on a contract-based relationship, renewed every 6 years. Fingers crossed again for this year. What we do with that furniture, though, is provide training and employment opportunities to long-term unemployed, or not so much long-term anymore, the things have changed. But it's about providing a salaried training programme to people who are unemployed, giving them the skills, particularly to enter the logistics industry. So some of the guys that join us, both males and females, join us without a driving licence in a lot of cases, and they're entering the logistics industry. So it's a certain barrier. We support them to gain their driving licence and then progress onto things like forklift truck or heavy goods vehicle licences. Very much tailored to the individual based on their particular needs. And I guess what I'm going to do today is extend on what's been discussed so far, and some of the points I've heard today around identifying need I think is a really important point to start with. And it's led us to some very challenging questions, and what I'm hoping to do today, as well as explain a bit of what we do and how we do it, is maybe ask some thought-provoking questions. Questions about how far we are along on our journey, both as an organisation and as a group of people in this room as well. We sell the furniture as well as reusing, we reuse as much as possible, but we don't sell second-hand furniture, we sell pre-loved furniture. It's the Marks and Spencers of second-hand furniture, if you like. That comes from our former chair, who is the chief exec of Rolls-Royce. And of course, you can't buy a second-hand Rolls-Royce, but you can buy a pre-loved Rolls-Royce. So, collection of furniture, provision of training and employment opportunities, and the sale of that furniture to people on low incomes. We also offer a one-stop shop, easy for me to say, service to social landlords to provide homes rather than houses for their tenants. So that's the provision of bespoke, brand new, contract standard furniture. So a range of things we're developing as we go along. We've been going for 27 years and we know we do good things. We are convinced of it. You walk into our recently refurbished reception and it is emblazoned in giant letters. We do good things. but we genuinely don't believe it's enough for us to have that confidence in our own ability. And that, I believe, is what we're talking about today. There is a need to demonstrate that social value. How many people in this room work in the third sector? Oh, good. We believe there is a moral duty for us to measure and manage our social performance in order to be accountable to our key beneficiaries. Our key beneficiaries, again, being people in poverty and long-term unemployment. So we see it as a real imperative to measure and manage that social performance, to enhance and maybe even maximise that social performance. So in line with that, for over 15 years, we've conducted social accounts, social reporting. Started very much as they have their economic accounts, we have our social, we had an environmental, then it became a social and environmental. We've now progressed to last year having our first set of fully audited, we were always fully audited, but integrated accounts based on the, and I forget the exact name, but I know Tim's going to help me out, the Integrated Reporting Framework. That's the word I missed. Thank you. Abiding by those principles, but also looking at AA 1000 principles in terms of the social aspect. So it was a very soul cleansing experience being audited. We had the financial audit, then the social audit happened. I now know absolutely everything that happens within the FRC because we have the systems to manage that, and that's what I'm going to allude to in a few moments. But again, it is that moral imperative. It's yes, the landscape's changing, and yes, there are now more calls, the coercive calls, if you like. You now need to measure this performance in order to gain the contracts. Absolutely. We've taken it a step further, I guess, and it's taken us a long time, as you can see, and we're definitely not there yet. But by internalising those processes, by using them to make decisions internally, and well, make better decisions, if you like, we can then use that data. We can use that data for those external reporting requirements as well. And I guess one thing I have picked up on today is the Social Value Act is incredibly important, but it's been very much about how we can use this externally. We've already heard this afternoon, though, that there is this internal value, and I guess that's what I really want to talk about with this idea of the development of social value budgets. So the reason I asked how many third sector organisations in the room to see how many things get thrown at me at the end is that we believe we should balance our financial and our social performance. And without measuring and managing that social performance, we don't believe we can be truly and fully accountable to those we intend to assist. So, our social value budgets. Our social value budgets. And while we're waiting for the clicker, you'll notice that we were the Impact Champion, thanks, for last year, owing very much to our impact report. The Social Enterprise UK have asked me today to do a, what was the phrase? A crappy job next year on the social accounts to let somebody else win it. What I can assure you is that we know we're not there yet. Again, we're on this journey and we will continue to refine those ideas. And some of this information will hopefully start to feature in this year's account. How much of that information we're still unsure. So, social value business or social business that creates social value, we need to measure and report against both our financial and our social bottom lines. Very much using the SROI, social return on investment principles. Not necessarily how perhaps people have used it in the past or people are aware of the framework. It's again that internal process that we've taken these ideas to. One of the major criticisms of SROI, and it's a legitimate criticism, is you cannot compare two analyses done on different activities. In accounting terms, it's comparing apples and pears, I've been told many times. What we're trying to move to, I guess, as an organisation, is where we can compare apples with apples, or pears with pears, as an internal organisation. So we've used these principles to construct forecasted social performance, and we measure that against actual social performance. I think that's something as well that's often overlooked with SROI, amongst other frameworks, is that it can be a forecasted tool. It doesn't have to be something done as an evaluation. So based on our experience, based on the fundamental principle of stakeholder engagement, we simply couldn't do it, and I don't think you should do it without stakeholder engagement. We've identified a range of key outcomes, the material outcomes, as we've been discussing, that are relevant and significant to our material stakeholders. This gives us consistency. because we're asking our stakeholders to identify initially what's important to them, how they would value those ideas. So as an example, we have 2 different training programs within the FRC. We have Driving Change. Driving Change is the one I've already alluded to, where people are on a salaried 12-month training program, provided with assistance to gain all the qualifications that I've discussed. So, their key outcomes, at the end of this, whilst they're on the training program, they've got more disposable income. Once they enter sustainable employment, which is the intention, we have success rates about 70%, and we track our trainees or ex-trainees for 18 months after completion of the program. So we're very happy, 70%, there's still room for improvement. And we take the value of the personal sense of agency, or the well-being valuation that was discussed this afternoon, or a slightly different but similar sort of principle. We also look at different outcomes. So if somebody didn't achieve that job, has this training program been of no value whatsoever? Well, actually, I guess some people may still have an improved confidence to find work. That raising of aspiration levels, if you like. As the third tier, there's general confidence, which is something we see as a stepping stone towards improved confidence to find work, ultimately aiming for that sustained employment. And I will come back to that final point on the practical example number 1. The second training program is voluntary in nature. It's far less intensive, not salaried, and people are with us for about an average of 22 days. So 12 months to 22 days, very difficult to compare them unless we've got this consistency of indicators, consistency of proxies, and consistency of approach. So we can now compare these 2 programs based on our social value budgets. What it allows us to do is say, okay, we have limited resources, as does everybody. Where should we invest our resource to create the most social value? Again, based on asking our stakeholders, what matters most to you? What has changed in your life, and how would you value those changes? So, the important points are that there is a similarity, if you like. There's a consistency of outcome. The improved confidence to find work is evident in both programs. If somebody finds work again, they don't get that secondary outcome of improved confidence to find work. That would be an element of double counting. But it's really important that we ask the negative questions. And I would say that's something that I've not necessarily felt that has come out sufficiently today, if I'd be so brave. The questions of, well, what's changed? Was it all positive? Did anything happen that you didn't intend? Or that we, as an organisation, didn't intend? And what we've discovered is, yes, 70% of people find work, and that's fantastic. What about the other 30%? Surely, as a social enterprise, we are focused on helping those people. Do we just say, well, 70%, that's good enough? Well, no, it's not. We want to work with these people. So what we've identified is that actually we raise people's confidence to find work, and they leave the training program, and if after a period of 2 months they don't find work, their confidence plummets. Not even to the same level it was, but even lower. It's a really challenging issue. Going to the board and saying, well, actually, we create negative impacts, negative social impacts for some disadvantaged people. What are we as an organisation going to do to make that better? Remember, we do good things. It's not enough to do good things. We want to do even more good things. We want to do better things. And we can only do that by asking awkward questions, questions that challenge us as an organisation to say, how successful are we being? So I'll leave the examples as it is for now. I'm hoping that there'll be some questions around that. It is very much about, creating your Excel spreadsheets, and the social budgets look very, very similar to the financial budgets. I'm sure that the accountants in the room will be quite happy with how they're illustrated. The board are then able to ask us the questions of why didn't we achieve that anticipated, expected social value. And it's not a case of saying, well, we weren't very good. It's a case of saying, well, can we do things a bit better? So, important point, let's ask about those awkward questions, those negative social value changes. We need to get to a point, I believe, where we're progressing towards where we can start to make internal comparisons, apples with apples. And I was asked as well, and I'm feeding back from the organisation around what we would like as an organisation from the Social Value Act. So I've focused very much on our internal process. And it is about being accountable to our key beneficiaries. We often refer to it as giving a voice to the voiceless. I often hear that, we know the price of everything and the value for nothing. It's not about putting a price tag on everything. It's about putting things on the table that were previously ignored or marginalised. What we're asking for, therefore, when we're going for opportunities with public services, is we need clarity. We've said this amongst a number of groups today, that we do need a general understanding of social value, social impacts, outcomes, all of those phrases that we use synonymously with one another. We do need some clarity. If there is a social value statement or a social value, what are we calling it in Liverpool, a social value charter, thank you, that's a fantastic starting point. But what we don't want is to be too rigid. We need the flexibility. The flexibility where we can say as an organisation, yes, we're addressing your required outcomes, but look at this other social value we're creating. Look at this stuff you just didn't consider. The other point is about engaging, going behind the numbers. We've had a recent incident where we've missed out on an opportunity because another organisation was going to create more full-time jobs. So the number was, well, they've got more than you. Well, what we needed the organisation, the commissioner, to look at was say, well, what kind of jobs? Who are we creating jobs for? We were going to create jobs for long-term unemployed on salaried training programmes with that progression to sustainable employment. Perhaps targeting those harder to reach people, creating more social value than simply X number of jobs. And finally, of course, it's important to be accountable. I'm saying we need to do that as organisations. Well, so do those making the commissioning decisions. They need to measure, they need to report, that those that have made those claims about creating social value stick to those claims and creating that more level playing field. And the clicker works. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, hopefully you found those interesting and varied and inspiring from many different perspectives. Have we got now questions? We've got about 20 minutes, lots of people, so can we keep the questions relatively brief? And panel, can we keep the answers relatively brief as well? Would you mind being the microphone buddy? Thank you, Chris. Yes, okay, so that lady there.
Hi, Gemma Bruce from Turning Point. Thanks to all the speakers, really interesting. I had a specific question for Adam. You talked about the two examples comparing the 12-month paid programme with a 22-day volunteering opportunity. I was just interested in what the result of the comparison was. Which one's better?
We want to know the number. We worked it out initially as social value created. And then we did do the ratio. So we looked at the inputs required, the difference in terms of management support, etc. And what we found was, unsurprisingly, that those people who move into long-term sustained employment, we can create far more social value than those people who join us for that short 22 days on average. What that's meant now as an organisation, it's no good just knowing that. We've demonstrated the value, and as Ali rightly said, you've got to then improve it. So what we're saying now is we need to do something about the other training programme. So what we've done as a result is started to improve the offering. So now a small number, very small number, are able to get forklift truck licence or experience as well. So we've started to strengthen the less intensive programme rather than make the better programme worse, if you like, raising the bar.
It's interesting that to some extent the flagship programmes of outsourcing of public services this government's brought in place is the work programme, which enshrines some of those things that you've just been talking about, getting sustainable long-term employment as an outcome and actually remunerating organisations on those outcomes rather than the previous fair deal type or whatever the name of the first one was, where actually you just got paid for hours of input. Well, social value is actually working its way into public procurement through things like the work programme. Next question. Yes, here in the front.
Diane Parks, John Taylor Hospice. I just had a quick question for you, Adam. You were talking about the people who then suffered that lack of confidence afterwards. And I just wondered what you then did do to try and help them or support them after that.
Yeah. So again, it was about asking those awkward questions, and it's something that we're doing at the moment. So one of the first initiatives, again for the less intensive program, we initiated what we've called Job Club. So we've invested in some computers. There's a space now where people can actively search for work, and we've invested in our people and learning team or our HR team, so that people are able to give more support. And it's about looking at trying to create those cause and effect pathways, if you like. So we're looking at where we can improve things. It's about establishing better relationships with employers. It's about bringing in more recognised training qualifications. So again, somebody started delivering this week MVQ qualifications for the trainees or the volunteers as well. So it's been a really interesting experience. It's really challenged us because we just thought we did good things. And actually we've realised we probably weren't doing as much as we wanted. It's also now allowing us to, our social mission about helping people in poverty. Well, the idea being we want to help them out of poverty. So we've now gone back again and we've started asking those questions about, well, is the training programme sufficient to get somebody out of poverty? Or are they moving to what the next layer would be, if you like, the edge of poverty? Is that enough for us? Well, no, not at all. Not as an organisation that's wanting to empower people to have a better life, then the difference between poverty and the edge of poverty is probably not that significant.
Okay, we've got a question at the back and then the lady here.
Somebody else.
Thanks. Ian Taylor from the Greater Manchester Centre for Voluntary Organisation. I'm new to social value. I've been kind of sent down to explore because we have an opportunity to influence the Greater Manchester strategy. I can understand quite a lot of the work around micro-measurement and internal processes. I was just wondering about the bigger picture and the idea that is there a place for the big aspirational measures? Just recently, I heard of in Boston where the mental health organisation said there would be no suicides, and that was the target, and so everybody pulls together to try and hit that target. But then I hear David Cameron say they promise full employment, and with more people who are in poverty and in work, I begin to wonder whether big aspirational measures have any value, or should we all be looking at what we can do as organisations and then aggregate it?
I'll pitch in my perspective for a second, because when we were designing our sustainabilities plan, I introduced our organisation to the concept of the BHAG, the Big Hairy Audacious Goal, which in my former consulting world was pretty common currency, and a lot of people hadn't heard of it and they thought, what the hell do you mean? What the hell I meant was that actually setting out an ambitious target that made people go, wow, was actually a good part of a strategy of getting people's attention, telling people we were serious about it and telling people it was important, and a feeling that an honest, good-intentioned and wholehearted failure, partial, against a really ambitious target was probably better than outperforming against a mealy-mouthed, so what, micro-improvement. Now, you need a good measure and a good blend, and our plan has got some that we think, I don't know how the hell we're going to do that, but we're going to give it our very best shot. Some that we think, yeah, okay, well, we've got a plan for that, and some we think, yeah, that's in the bag. And I think having a mixture, but for me and for our organisation, having a BHAG was and is an important element of leadership and taking it seriously. Ali and Mark, you've seen lots of organisations, big and small. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, so I think the simple answer to your question is absolutely yes. And I'll give you an example. I've been working with various government parties looking at the issue of affordable credit. So if you've seen Save the Children's, I'm not sure about the title, it's called the Poverty Premium, but it's actually looking at the costs of being poor relative to the costs of not being poor. So that you actually pay more for credit, you pay more for electricity, etc., etc. So the construct goes, actually, if you could provide affordable forms of credit, to which we are can use, what would be the social impact on those individuals, their families, and actually the economy as a whole. And it then leads you to say that no one organisation in the UK can address this issue. It involves partnership if we're going to tackle it, because if we were going to tackle it, it would have been tackled already through one organisation, whether that be government, whether that be social enterprise, whether that be commerce. So having that aspiration, being clear about what the benefits of addressing that aspiration are, has led to engagement with a whole cross group of organisations that are now saying, well, if we really want to do this, this is how we should work together. And we've got clarity over what we're going to achieve.
Audacious goals.
Audacious goals, yes. And I guess what you were sort of hinting at with your question was how do we measure them accurately? And I think the bigger up the goal is, the harder inevitably it becomes to measure, and also the more modelling and assumptions you have to build into that measurement. But one thing that I didn't talk about, which is really good practice and can be done at many scales, is theory of change. And we use that with all of our social return on investments as well, which is if you've got a really big goal, that's brilliant, but what are the steps that it's going to take you to get to that place, and who's going to be involved along the way? And by creating a diagram, we normally do them diagrammatically, and you can put a narrative with it, you can actually lay out all of the assumptions that you're going to take along the way and put down reasonable places where you could actually do that measurement. So we're actually working with a town in Devon at the moment, which is trying to integrate across the voluntary sector, the public sector, and in some cases also the private sector. They've got really big goals for the town in terms of increased prosperity, increased life expectancy. So we've worked with them to create a theory of change from those big outcomes, long-term outcomes, with a reasonable time period that they might achieve them, and then look at the actors and the outcomes all the way back and think, when should I be measuring myself against this outcome? When should I be measuring myself against that one? And who should be reporting at different points? Because once you've got that whole framework in one place, you can check whether or not you're on track.
Okay, next question, and then the lady in the front in the white.
Amanda Henshaw from the University of Greenwich. It's another question about your 30%, Adam. I was just wondering, did you find that they face particular structural barriers or inequalities as a group? I mean, did they tend to be older people, people with disabilities as well?
Yeah,
I mean?
I guess the cohort of our trainees has changed over time. Bless you. We were predominantly a funded organisation initially. We're now 97% self-sufficient through contracts. And with that, the target of our trainees has changed. It did very much used to be people who with X number of years unemployed from a particular region, whereas now it is... I guess there are still barriers, not necessarily the structural barriers. What we now do to through our recruitment is do a needs analysis, as well as looking at somebody who perhaps has a greater fit with the organisation, if that makes sense. So what we've found very, very recently is about 90% of our salaried trainees come from our voluntary programme, and that's been a real eye-opener for us. And what we've now found is that nobody leaves the programme. So we've got 100% success in terms of the output of the training programme, which leads us to the so what proposition. But yes, the so what employment, not necessarily around those issues. What we have started to identify is that it's more around level of experience. So we're giving people or helping people gain entry-level experience when it's actually supervisory experience that is perhaps needed. So again, what we're looking at is the training programme. Does it need to become something quite radically different, a 2-year programme with a year as a supervisor, or those sorts of issues? So not so much around structural issues, more about what we have provided to the individuals. And again, that's changing what we're offering to them. Not sure if I answered. Next question.
Ethel from Business in the Community. So you mentioned that different valuation techniques may throw different values at the end of the exercise. So how can this evidence be used to strengthen the Social Value Act and the way that local procurement teams are looking at the data when that's presented to them? And how can your businesses as well share this evidence and examples with the wider business or private sector?
Okay, anyone in particular you want to point that at, or shall we all have a go? Who wants to go first? Nobody. Go on, ladies first. Then.
So valuation is a useful step because it helps you compare different types of outcomes in a common unit. And I think we always say when we come on the social return on investment, the kind of experience you have on the course of like your energy and enthusiasm goes a little bit like this, and when it gets to valuation, full of whoo, right down here, because you realise how subjective a lot of the valuation points are. But there's been some really great initiatives, such as HACT, you can see Lizzie sitting there, to try and standardise and make that valuation step a little bit easier. I think these are really good initiatives. The only caveat is that you should always try and balance it into something that's representative of what your stakeholders consider that value to be as far as possible as well. So I think I could see in terms of making comparisons it can be useful, but there's just a lot of variety in the way that people approach social valuation. So I would be kind of nervous about wholesale endorsement at this point of trying to use it to encourage service providers in particular to measure themselves with valuation, because it was also quite an involved process if you're going to do it properly. And so particularly smaller organisations, so some councils have got very excited about social return on investment, for example, and have said, great, anyone who wants to tender for our services needs to provide an SROI as part of what they're going to deliver. It takes around, we say as a rule of thumb, about 40 man days worth of work to deliver an SRI, which is really an intensive, big resource commitment. So in some senses, it can price out smaller providers who may be providing just as much value. So there are ways of kind of working in partnerships of groups so that you can perhaps have a common evaluation going across a large number of smaller providers. That could help. Or just do really good qualitative outcomes research, because if you evidenced well through doing robust, good qualitative analysis in the first place, then you might not actually need to go to that step.
If I go next and leave Mark with the last word, because he's seen a lot of breadth of solutions. From my perspective, there isn't a single silver bullet, and if you look too hard for it, you're in danger of missing a whole load of really quite nice bronze and ruby bullets. That location and context is a very important concept in social value, and therefore, because each location differs from each other location, and each context differs, and each individual's perspective differs. I mean, you showed it in your Southwark example. Perspective and people, value is in the eye of the recipient or the beholder sometimes, rather than just the bestower of it. So it's all very, very complicated, even before you delve into the how much data can you actually dig out of your organisation and how robust can it be, and which indices of multiple deprivation should you apply against which particular outputs. That I think, as we saw people saying at the open plenary, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and don't obsess too far down the rabbit hole of getting a perfect measure that can apply everywhere, and don't forget the subjectivity that applies in this world of social value. That would be my view. Mark?
Yeah, I guess there's two perspectives on this. One is anybody from a procurement department before I make this statement? No? Yes, you are.
I'll watch them.
Okay, so if you read the Communities Count report, and certainly as a reflection of some of the survey results, I would say that certain procurement departments see this as an imposition, and certain procurement departments see this as an ability to engage. And I think the degree to which they're doing that will influence how they take a view. To be fair to any procurement department, we are on a journey, and the best way I explain this is, if 20 years ago I had said to interview, what is your carbon footprint, you wouldn't know what I was talking about. Now we do. And I think we're on a journey where ultimately we will be able to compare and contrast against a set of metrics and take a view, A, in terms of who might be the best service provider, and B, and I absolutely agree with Adam on this, that we've got transparency and metrics that allow us and confirm that they have delivered what they said they would do at the outset.
I just wanted to add a point to that. I know, again, the question was very much about how we use this externally. And I guess the way we look at social value at the FRC and also with the SROI network, soon to be Social Value UK, by the way, is there's a spectrum, if you like, of social value. It goes from that external rigorous, that scientific, counterfactual, to this other point where information is good enough. And we're somewhere closer to the information being good enough, and good enough for us as an organisation to make a decision. It may not pass the academic test, it may not go through the peer review scientific journals, but that's not the intention. We want to use that information to make a better decision. So don't be too worried, and I think I can often present that information, come up with social value budgets. I was once asked quite recently, how many days does it take to develop your systems? Well, we've been going for about 8 years and we're nearly there. So it takes a while. But the information will be good enough. You will collect more information already than you think you do, and a lot of that information will be very useful and valuable to you.
Okay, well, I'll do a very brief summing up, but I think we've run out of time for questions, which is a great shame. I think it's been a very lively discussion, and thank you for your questions. I'm really enthused, and Interserve, as their sponsorship of this event this year and last year's shows, is really committed and enthused in the whole area of social value, which is a key fundamental part of the DNA of our organisation, but of any right-thinking organisation. I love it that we can sit up here and share a platform with this disparate bunch of organisations and attitudes that, to the uninformed observer, you'd think, well, what on earth strings us together? Well, what brings us together is we're balancing our financial and our social performance. As Adam said, I could put that directly to my shareholders and say precisely the same thing. We're accountable to other people, to our wider stakeholders, for our imprint on the society in which we operate. We've all got communities in which we need to thrive and on which we have an impact. We're all wrestling with the challenges of how far down the rabbit hole of perfection do we go, and when is good enough good enough? And we're collaborating to try to get to those answers. We all recognise that there's no shortcut. We all recognise that what you put out as a measurement tool has got to reflect the DNA of your organisation, because you can't, as my chief exec is fond of saying, you can't put lipstick on a pig. So if your organisation doesn't buy into social value, don't bother wasting your time with the TIM methodology or getting NEF in. It's got to reflect who you are, and any, as I said, any right-minded organisation has genuinely got to go on that journey for itself. You can't just buy that off the shelf. But I think all the people in this room and at this summit, from whatever sector, whatever persuasion, we all get it, and we all see that it's complicated and it's nuanced and it's bloody important. And I'll thank you all for coming. I'd like you to join me in thanking the panellists for really good participation. And all that remains to say is you've got 15 minutes, coffee upstairs and Hazel Blears for the closing. Okay, good afternoon everybody. Thank you for coming to the Measuring Value workshop. On your seats you'll